There was once a man who had only one real friend in the world, a gentle brown dog named Milo. Milo was not a show dog, nor particularly fast or clever. He was simply a dog with soft fur, kind eyes, and a heart full of devotion. The man, whose name was Thomas, had lived alone for many years. He worked quietly from home, keeping to a simple life of small routines and little joys. Every morning he would step out into the cool air of the garden, and Milo would be there, waiting, tail wagging, ears perked, as if the dog could sense the day ahead. Thomas would smile at him. "Good morning, Milo," he would say, scratching behind his ears. Milo would respond with a small bark, running around Thomas's legs as though saying, "Good morning, let's start the day together." They had a rhythm, a silent understanding. Milo never begged for much. He didn't need toys or treats. He only wanted to be near Thomas, to walk beside him, to rest his head by his feet at night. Every morning they walked to the gate together. It was a simple walk down the lane, past the old oak tree and past the neighbors' gardens. But to Milo, it was the best part of the day. He would look up at Thomas, eyes shining, and follow every step he took. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Milo would wait at the gate for Thomas to return. He never wandered off. He never grew tired. And every time Thomas appeared, Milo's joy seemed endless. He would leap, bark softly, and press his head against Thomas's hand, just to feel the warmth of their connection. To Milo, Thomas wasn't just a person. He was home. And for Thomas, Milo was the only constant companion in a world that often felt quiet and lonely. He would sometimes whisper, "I don't know what I'd do without you, boy." And Milo would respond with a wag of his tail, as if saying, "And I wouldn't be without you either." Life went on quietly, filled with the small routines of comfort. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. They were simply two beings, man and dog, who loved each other in a world that could be cold and indifferent. And yet, life has a way of changing without warning.
Life continued in its quiet rhythm. Mornings, walks, evenings at the gate, everything seemed ordinary. But one morning, Milo noticed something different. Thomas did not move as quickly as usual. His steps were slower, a faint wobble in his legs that had never been there before. Milo trotted alongside, glancing up at Thomas, worried. He nudged Thomas's hand with his nose, but Thomas only gave a weak smile. "I'm fine, Milo," Thomas whispered, "just a little tired." But Milo could feel it. Dogs notice things humans often ignore: a change in breathing, a subtle tremor, a heaviness in the step. Milo stayed closer than ever that day, following Thomas from room to room. Days passed, and the changes became more noticeable. Thomas's morning walks became shorter. He sat more, his hands trembling slightly as he poured tea. Milo would sit beside him, resting his head on Thomas's lap, offering silent comfort. Then came the day Thomas did not get up. Milo pawed at him gently in the morning, expecting the usual routine, expecting the warm hand to scratch behind his ears, expecting the familiar smell of Thomas's cologne. But Thomas did not stir. Thomas had fallen seriously ill. A neighbor, seeing Thomas on the floor, called an ambulance. Milo barked and howled as the ambulance took him away, pacing the driveway, refusing to leave. He ran alongside the car as far as the leash allowed, straining to keep up. But soon the vehicle disappeared around the corner, leaving Milo alone. For Milo, it was confusing and terrifying. He did not understand words like hospital or sick. He only knew that the person he loved, the one who was his entire world, had vanished. Neighbors tried to comfort him, but Milo wanted no one. He refused food, refused walks, and only sat by the gate, staring down the road, waiting. Hours turned into a day, and then another. He waited for footsteps, for Thomas's return, for the familiar sound of his voice calling his name. At night, Milo curled up in the spot where Thomas used to sit and read, the chair now empty, the room quiet. He lifted his head frequently, ears alert, listening for any sign of life. But the house was silent. Days passed. The ambulance visits continued. Visitors came, talking in hushed tones about Thomas's health. Milo would not enter the room when they tried to take him there. He stood outside the door, whining softly, pressing his nose against the wood, as if he could sense Thomas beyond it. And still, Milo waited. Because dogs understand loyalty in ways humans often forget. They do not leave, they do not forget, they do not give up on those they love, no matter how long it takes.
The days grew quieter, heavier. Milo no longer waited at the gate with the same hope he once did. Instead, he lingered by the door, staring out, ears flat, eyes wide and sad. Something had changed, though he did not know what. Thomas had been taken to the hospital, and Milo could only remember the smell of antiseptic, the distant hum of machines, and the strangers who touched him with cold hands. Days passed, and slowly the neighbors whispered in hushed voices, avoiding the dog's gaze. One evening, a somber figure came home and sat in the living room. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke softly to Milo. "Thomas, he's gone, Milo," she said. The words meant nothing to the dog. Gone? What did that mean? Milo pressed his nose into her hand, whining softly, trying to wake Thomas, trying to bring him back. But Thomas did not stir. The silence was heavier than anything Milo had ever felt. The next morning, people arrived at the house. There were soft voices, a few strangers, and a black car waiting outside. Milo watched as men carried Thomas out, draped in white sheets. He barked, ran alongside the car as far as the leash allowed, but he could not follow. His friend, his home, his world was being taken away. The funeral was quiet. A small group of neighbors and a few family friends stood near the grave. Milo sat just outside the circle, ears alert, eyes fixed on the figure lying under the earth. He did not understand the ceremony, the words, the flowers, or the tears, but he understood absence, and it filled him with confusion and sorrow. When the last shovel of soil fell, Milo stepped closer. A cold wind brushed his fur, but he stayed. He sniffed the ground, pressed his head to the fresh earth, and let out a soft whine, a sound full of longing, full of love, full of heartbreak. Days passed. People returned to their lives. They went to work, to shops, to their own homes, forgetting in small ways that life goes on. But Milo did not forget. He did not move. He returned to the grave every morning, walking slowly along the path through the grass, pausing at the stone that now marked Thomas's resting place. He lay down beside it, pressing his cheek to the cold stone, curling as he had curled beside Thomas's feet every night. Neighbors began to notice. They would stop quietly, watching the dog who refused to leave. Some whispered to one another, tears in their eyes, marveling at the loyalty and love that a dog could feel. Milo did not care about their whispers. He only cared about Thomas. The seasons changed. Rain fell, leaves turned gold, and snow covered the ground in soft blankets. Milo waited through them all. He endured cold nights and hot days, hunger and loneliness, because in his heart Thomas still existed, and waiting was the only way to honor that love. Every morning he rose from his small bed in the corner of the yard, stretched his aching legs, and walked to the grave. Every evening he returned, pressing close to the cold stone, resting his tired head, listening to a silence that was louder than anything he had ever known. And in that quiet, relentless devotion, Milo spoke a language of love that no human words could capture. A promise kept, a heart unbroken, even when the one he loved most was gone.
Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed, yet Milo's devotion never wavered. Every morning he rose from his small, worn bed in the corner of the empty house, stretched his aching legs, and limped down the path to Thomas's grave. His steps were slower now, each one a little heavier than the last, but still filled with purpose. At first, neighbors had left food and water for him, hoping he would eat, hoping he would rest, but Milo refused. Meals were untouched. The biscuits, the bowls of meat, the scraps of bread, none of it mattered. To him, there was only one sustenance: Thomas. He would sit beside the food, sniff it, and then turn his gaze toward the grave. Hunger gnawed at him, but he did not care. He was waiting. Milo grew thinner. His ribs became visible beneath his fur. Once soft and strong, his body had begun to weaken. Each step became an effort, each breath a reminder of the time that had passed without the man he loved. But still, he walked to the grave every day. Winter came, harsh and unforgiving. Snow covered the fields, icing the paths, and the wind cut sharply through his fur. Milo shivered, but he did not leave. He curled beside the cold stone, pressing his thin body against it for warmth, eyes fixed on the horizon, listening for footsteps that would never return. Sometimes children passing by would throw sticks or stones to make him move, or the occasional villager would shake their head in pity. Life went on for them. They had jobs, families, chores. They moved past the grief, but Milo could not. His grief was not something to forget. It had become the very fabric of his being. Illness crept slowly into his fragile body. His once bright eyes dulled. His breathing became shallow. The neighbors noticed his labored movements, but shrugged it off, busy with their own lives. "He'll manage," some said. "He's an old dog." But no one understood the depth of his suffering, the heartbreak of waiting, the loneliness that no company could soothe. Milo's days were a quiet torment. He would sometimes lie down beside the grave and whimper softly, a sound full of longing and sorrow. Rain would fall on his soaked fur, yet he did not rise. Sunlight would warm the earth, yet he stayed,
pressing his head closer to the stone. Nights were the hardest, alone, hungry, cold, and aching, yet still he waited. One evening, a kind neighbor tried once more to coax him home. "Milo, come inside, eat something, you need to rest," she pleaded. But Milo did not budge. He pressed his thin body closer to the grave, whining softly, eyes searching the horizon. He would not leave. He could not. To leave was to betray Thomas, and betrayal was impossible for a heart like his. Time continued its slow, cruel march. Milo grew weaker. He stumbled along the path, pawing at the dirt, trying to reach the gravestone he loved so dearly. Each day he ate less, drank less, his body wasting away under the weight of his grief and loyalty. And then, one cold morning, the villagers found him lying beside the grave, fur matted, ribs showing, breaths shallow, eyes half closed, still gazing at Thomas's resting place. He did not stir when they approached him. He did not whimper. Milo had waited until his body could no longer continue, until his heart, loyal to the very end, finally gave way. Tears fell freely from the eyes of those who had once ignored him, watching too late the depth of his devotion. Children cried, elderly neighbors shook their heads in sorrow. They realized finally that Milo's love had been greater than anything they had ever known. The villagers buried Milo beside Thomas. They dug a small grave next to the stone, laying the faithful dog gently in the earth. They placed a simple marker beside him, Milo, the loyal. Above the graves, the wind whispered through the trees. Rain fell softly, washing the soil, and there 2 bodies lay side by side, the man and his dog, together again in eternity. No hunger, no loneliness, no sorrow could reach them now. People moved on, as life always does. They forgot the hours Milo had spent waiting. They forgot the sadness etched into the cold stone. But anyone who visited that quiet graveyard, anyone who saw the small faded marker beside Thomas's, could feel the love that had endured beyond a lifetime, the love of a dog who refused to leave, who starved and ached and suffered, all for the one soul he cherished more than his own. And so, in the soft light of dawn, with dew on the grass and the scent of the earth around them, Thomas and Milo lay together, man and dog, in a bond stronger than death itself.
Seasons passed, years rolled on, and the village went about its life. New children played where Milo once waited, new flowers bloomed near the graves, and the world carried on, moving faster than grief could follow. But Thomas and Milo were not forgotten, not entirely. Occasionally villagers would pause when passing the graveyard. They would see the 2 small markers in the soft earth, side by side. They would remember the story of the dog who waited, who loved with every breath, who refused to leave even when all the world had turned away. Some nights the wind would whisper through the trees above the graves. The birds would settle on the stones as if paying respect. And for those who stood quietly, listening, it almost felt as though Milo's soft, loyal heart still beat beside Thomas's, a reminder that love, once pure and true, does not end with life. Children who had once teased the dog now told the story with reverence. That dog waited for his man even when no one else cared, they said. And in their eyes, something of Milo's spirit lived on, a lesson in loyalty, in devotion, and in the quiet power of love. Inside the village, people went on with their busy lives. some forgetting small details, some growing old. Yet the tale of Milo lingered. It lingered in conversations whispered between neighbors. It lingered in hearts touched by the reality of his patience, his sacrifice, his unbroken bond. Milo's grave remained modest, a small stone in a quiet corner, yet it told a story greater than words. That love can endure beyond life itself, that loyalty can outlast years, that a bond between a man and his dog can be stronger than death. And if anyone walks the graveyard on a quiet morning, when the dew sparkles on the grass and the sun is just beginning to rise, they might feel it, a faint presence, a warmth, a sense of waiting that has ended at last. Thomas and Milo rest together now. No hunger, no cold, no loneliness, no sorrow, just peace. And in that peace their love continues, timeless, endless, perfect.